Two new books highlight St. Louis history. We'll have details next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter. Welcome to City Corner. Well, two new books out from Reedy Press should be on your radar. A little bit later in the program, we're going to talk about the book Scenes of Historic Wonder St. Louis, which takes a look back at some interesting historical things in St. Louis you might not know about. But right now, if automobiles are of interest to you, I'd like to introduce you to our two guests. They are the author of They Will Run, The Golden Age of Automobiles in St. Louis. Please welcome Molly Butterworth and Tom Eisel. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, good to be here.
So I'm not the only car enthusiast.
Apparently not.
I thought it was just guys, or am I being old-fashioned?
No, with all due respect, that is very old-fashioned. I was raised to be a car girl way back in the 70s, this kind of Nixon kid.
You have interesting stories, too, on your backgrounds. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. For those that don't know, and maybe people don't today, but I know at my age growing up, I used to always associate automobiles, manufacturing automobiles in St. Louis. How big was it at one time?
Very big. It's been said that St. Louis was second only to Detroit in the mid-50s through the mid-60s in terms of the manufacture of automobiles, and that went on for several years. Unfortunately, it's no longer the case, but the state of Missouri is still seventh in the country in terms of manufacture.
Really? Why did we fall down the notch?
A couple of big reasons. Number one, the Depression. Because the St. Louis builders were building for quality as opposed to quantity, i.e. they weren't grouping together with their assembly lines, forming corporations like General Motors. They were standalone, high quality, individualized builders. Because of that, and because we lost our kind of nucleus as a railroad hub early on by waiting just a little bit too long to build the Eads Bridge, that had later effects, but it really was the Depression that brought down the St. Louis builders.
It's just tied into how manufacturing's kind of been on decline. Just overall, not just in the automobile industry,
Yes,
too, right?
Absolutely.
Why don't we look at a few images from your book right now? You can share with us what we're seeing.
This is a great portrait that indicates another reason why St. Louis is such a fantastic car town. This is a shot of one of the chapters of the League of American Wheelmen, bicyclists and often bicycle racers. They hosted races here in St. Louis. This shot was taken of a local chapter near the Frank Blair statue in Forest Park. Because bicycle racing and just recreational riding was so popular here in St. Louis paved many of its city streets early on, which also helped the transition over to the automobiles.
Right. Let's look at the next one.
This is the Doris Motor Car Company, and one of the major manufacturers in St. Louis between about 1905 and 1930. George Doris was the chief engineer for the St. Louis Motor Carriage Company. When that company moved to Peoria, Illinois, he founded his own car company. Actually, a couple of his buildings still exist. The Center of Emergent Technologies.
So what was, we'll go ahead and address this one, then I have a question for you. Go ahead.
One of the great silent screen actresses, Clara Bow, was photographed in, and I love this, 1925 on a 1919 moon built here in St. Louis. 6 years later, the car still looked so good and had such a great moon shape to it that her publicity agent thought, yeah, we're going to put you on a moon for this 1925 shot with the California plates and the Hollywood tag underneath.
Almost looks like she's wearing a baseball uniform there.
She is.
Oh, she is? Okay. You mentioned why St. Louis became the hub. I think you mentioned the railroads. Was that really why we gained prominence in automobile manufacturing altogether, just because of the geographical location and the ties to the railroad for shipping and that sort of thing?
There are a couple of other important factors. Before the railroads, of course, the indigenous peoples, the early and mid-Mississippian tribes identified St. Louis as a great transportation hub, in large part because of the two major rivers servicing the area. After the European immigration started, the German immigrants to St. Louis, many of whom were wagon builders and who brought their craftsmanship from Germany here to St. Louis, helped propel St. Louis as a transportation hub. Many of those people then later jumped over to the horseless carriages as opposed to the horse-drawn.
You have anything to add to that?
Well, actually, there were also a lot of interesting personalities in St. Louis. A lot of people that were sort of innovative, some a little eccentric and so on, but they were tinkering out garages, and along with the railroads, the paved roads, and just the manufacturing center of the city. There was a lot of foundation already built.
Let's look at two more images from your book, They Will Run, the golden age of the automobile in St. Louis. Well, what's this?
This is arguably the first gas station in the country.
No kidding.
This was at 420 South Teresa, and it was a
Where
Shell
would that
station.
Be? Pardon me, where's that?
Just off of Locust and sort of off of what became Automobile Row, actually. And as you can see by the sign there, it's a little hard to read, but it was opened in 1905, Shell station, and we like to claim it as the first station in the country, and that's somewhat argued by people across the country, but
we're right.
We're right, of course
Yeah.
we are. One of many firsts for St. Louis.
Wow.
We really love this shot.
I've seen the pictures from this event.
Members of the Omaha Tangier Shriners would, on their own dime, buy custom Corvettes, custom usually because of the paint color they specified. Because they were custom Corvettes, they need to pick them up here at the plant in St. Louis as opposed to at their local dealership. They would buy these on their own and then use them for charity events back home in Omaha, supporting, of course, the Shriners' causes, most notably the Children's Hospital. This shot was taken in 1965. The arch experts could probably almost pinpoint the date this picture was taken, given the construction status of the arch behind
I remember when the arch was in that phase, vaguely. You know, I remember growing up, so I'm thinking 1960s maybe, and I was very conscious of the automobile industry in St. Louis, and I remember the GM plant out around Fenton, wherever that was. Chrysler, I always get them all mixed up. And then the Corvettes were made in North City somewhere.
Union and Natural Bridge.
The buildings are still there, aren't they?
They're still there, and it's been repurposed into a business park.
And you mentioned Automobile Row. Wasn't that sort of near Olive or something around Midtown?
The main one was on Locust Street, and many of the buildings are still there. We have a lot of images of those buildings, and Molly has actually taken a lot of images of modern versions of the buildings on Automobile Row.
And we feature 3 of the automobile rows here in St. Louis, predominantly the one there on Locust, and that has been recognized through signage, interpretive signage posted by the Horses Carriage Club, but also Del Mar and South Kings Highway.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at one more image from your book before we go any further. And after that, I want to talk to you a little bit about your own background and love for the automobile. There's the cover of the book. You've been doing a lot of book signings, I think, recently. How's that been going?
Going very well. Lots and lots of gearheads in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about both your backgrounds. You just don't write a book about automobiles unless you got a past and a love for them, Molly. What was yours? We kind of touched on it.
I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the child of 2 automotive enthusiasts, believe it or not. My mom was a lover of German cars, and I could pick out details of Volkswagens starting at the age of 3 or 4. She would try to hide the car she was looking at, and she'd give me a little hint, and I'd say, okay, I know exactly what that was. It was a 1980 Volkswagen Rabbit diesel.
Wow.
You know, things like that. My dad, a Chevy fan. Growing up in a small town, you needed your vehicles to get to almost anything, whether it was a movie theater or a shopping center, or for me, fortunately, thanks to my parents, horse shows and things where we needed the big trucks. Mm-hmm. I was a history lover, majored in history back home in Miami University. Finished it early and thought, oh, I'd like to just take golf my senior year, you know, and kind of goof off. Mom and Dad said, no, try again, pick up another major. So it was English. That really turned my love of writing on. Then I went from there, knowing because my parents were teachers, I didn't really want to be a teacher myself, that museums were attractive. I then obtained a master's degree in public history, which really cultivates people to work in museums, archives, historic sites, and so forth.
I want to impress you with a Volkswagen story. I had a bright orange Volkswagen Super Beetle convertible in college.
Ooh, nice.
And when I was young, my dad would have a Volkswagen Beetle, like in the early mid-'60s. We had a long driveway, and we'd run down to meet him after work, and then we'd ride on the, you know, the side bars, whatever you call that on the side?
Boards.
The running boards. Yeah, we'd ride on the outside up to the garage. So those are my Volkswagen memories.
It's a good car to have them with.
Tom, what about your background?
I started working at a gas station in 1972 and was working on what have come to be called 60s muscle cars when they were secondhand cars, and just sort of fell in love with them at the time and have never lost that passion for older cars.
But don't you own a couple?
4.
Only 4?
Yeah, I'd like to get more, but maybe you could talk to my wife about that.
Do you have any classic ones you want to share with us?
I've got 2 GTOs, 64,
Pontiac
the first
GTOs.
year, and 66, and
Those are sporty, kind of like Mustangs.
and a Firebird and a 69 Camaro.
I had a Firebird and a Camaro too.
Oh my gosh, okay.
Tell me the truth, how many?
I did have 2, and the reason why I have them no longer is one that's almost far too entertaining, but I had a 67 GTO convertible. Like Tom, I'm a big Pontiac fan, and I had a 61 Porsche 356B California black plate car, absolutely
That sounds
amazing.
exotic.
It was exotic, and driving the rear engine Porsche, a completely different experience. Loved that
What do
car.
you think about cars these days?
They're built a lot better than they used to be, more reliable, easier to drive, but in my mind, don't have the same spirit that they had years ago.
Is it just because I'm getting older, or I almost think there's too much technology in them? It's like I'll never know how to do everything in there. I remember when I drove, there were 2 buttons to choose from.
That's right.
My car out in the parking lot right now is 18 years old. I like its simplicity. My beloved old Ford diesel truck, it's knocking on a quarter century, eligible for historic plates, but I can work on it. I love that. I don't want to let go of that, nor do I want to let go of the manual transmissions in both.
Right,
So.
I like the manual transmission. You remember when you used to change your own oil and stuff like that? Hey, you mentioned a lot of the old cars that St. Louis was known for. You mentioned Moon and Doris. I don't know, there's Gardner, and there was the Dyke. Are these being remembered in any way historically in St. Louis? Is there a little museum, and what's this?
This is actually George Doris on the left in the white hat and Andrew Lee Dyke on the right in a 1902 St. Louis.
And speaking of Doris, you have a foreword in your book by Andy Doris. I'm just assuming there's a connection?
He is a grandson of George Preston Doris, who was one of the founders of St. Louis Motor Car and also founded Doris Motor Carriage.
Back to my question. Are we remembering this history enough besides your book? Is there a museum that addresses it enough, or what do you think?
The National Museum of Transportation here in St. Louis, out in St. Louis County, is one of the forerunners. They have done a fantastic job of collecting not only the vehicles themselves, Moons, looting house, traffic trucks, also the trucks that were built here in St. Louis, all the way up through a 1965 Corvette convertible. They have a fantastic archival collection as well.
Well, they will run the golden age of automobile in St. Louis is the name of the book by Reedy Press. You can go to reedypress.com. Or I guess wherever books are sold. Would that be right?
Absolutely.
And I know you've got a couple more book signings coming up, so people can watch for that. Molly Butterworth, Tom Eisel, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And motor on.
Please do.
Okay. We're going to be back with more of the history of St. Louis after this.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes, and you can do it here. So what are you waiting for? Just go to the site.
I'm Steve Potter. Welcome back to City Corner. Today we're taking a closer look at two new books from Reedy Press that examine St. Louis's history in different ways. And right now, one of the authors of Scenes of Historic Wonder St. Louis, Cameron Collins, joins us. He wrote this book along with Jamie Barossa. Hi, Cameron, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Now, in our first segment, we dealt with the automobile industry, the history of the automobile industry in St. Louis. Were you a car person too at one time?
Unfortunately, I am not a car person.
You're not?
I drive a 2009 Dodge Caravan, and there's nothing special about it.
I'm glad my other guests are gone.
Yeah, I know.
They would
I
just.
know.
What are you interested in?
St. Louis history, that is exactly what I'm interested in. So.
Well, tell me about Scenes of Historic Wonder St. Louis. Am I right in sort of saying these are the things in your book, a lot of these things people wouldn't necessarily be aware of. It's not things you learned in St. Louis history class.
Right, and you know, it is my firm belief that St. Louis is one of the most historically significant cities in the United States, and there's so much to it. And I'm really excited about this book because we're kind of peeling the layers back a little bit and showing just some offbeat, really interesting, quirky history of St. Louis, just, you know, stories and interesting things that I think people are really going to enjoy.
And it's as much about the photographs as it is the text.
Yes, the book was built from the photographs, and you know, and you see these photographs appear from time to time on the internet and things. And Jamie and I decided, let's do the research and figure out what the story is going on behind these photographs.
All right, well, let's give me some examples here.
Sure.
We're going to look at some images from the book, and you can tell me what they're about.
Yeah, I mean, simply, this is, you know, the kind back in the day, the kind of thing you'd see in St. Louis. Bertie Brooks hanging from a biplane from his teeth, you know, flying around St. Louis. And,
like that was normal?
Well, you know, weird things in St. Louis could happen from time to time.
And who was he? I'd never heard his name.
Just a stuntman, a daredevil of his age.
Let's go to the next one.
This is one of my favorites. Everyone knows the famous story of Eddie Goodell, who Bill Veeck brought out to bat for the St. Louis Browns. You know, when he walked on 4 pitches. But the story's even better, is that Eddie Goodell, who came out in the second game of a doubleheader to bat, but Bill Veeck actually presented him by having him jump out of a cake during the first game of the doubleheader. So that's what we were trying to do, is talk about, you know, the stories behind some of these.
Let's look at one more before I ask you something.
Yeah, this is a photo that the previous guest may enjoy. This is just simply, you know, when St. Louis, when automobiles started to become popular, you would, you know, see cars choked along roads like Lindell and Forest Park, people getting out for a country drive.
I'm surprised you have a picture of a car in your book.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Hey, I want to point out something. I sort of see a theme in you, because you were on the show a few years ago because you come out with a book, Lost Treasures of St. Louis.
Correct.
So you definitely have a love of history.
I do. I am enthralled with St. Louis history, and I'm not from here. But since moving here, I just keep uncovering the story of the city, and it amazes me at every turn.
Uh-huh. How long have you lived here?
It has been a while now. It's been 1995 since I've moved here. And I just moved my mother here, so I have no ties to my old stomping grounds in upstate New York anymore.
Well, great. Well, we're glad you're here. Let's look at some more images from your book. Scenes of Historic Wonders, St. Louis.
This is the last wooden grandstand in Major League Baseball history. This was Robeson Field, which once sat at the corner of Natural Bridge, and where it's actually stood where Beaumont High School stands today. Mm-hmm. And it's where the St. Louis Cardinals played before they moved into Sportsman's Park.
Wow. Let's look at one more.
Great shot. This is, everyone knows the Clydesdales in St. Louis, but few people know that our other famous brewery from the past, the Lemp Brewery, the Western Brewery, they were first with their draft horses. They actually used Percherons to move their beer around town. So the Clydesdales didn't show up until after Prohibition, but the Lemps had the Percherons moving around even before then.
Was the Lemp Brewery near the mansion?
Yes, the big Lemp Brewery that still stands down there today with the big
Oh, right. Okay.
smokestack and everything.
Do you have a favorite story in particular? From
Yeah.
I don't know how many you have in here.
There are more than 200 photos, and I think there's another photo coming soon of one of my favorites, which is the St. Louis Motordrome.
All right, well, let's take a look at the next one. Maybe that's it. If it's not, we'll get to it eventually.
Or we'll get to it. This is it, perfect timing. At the corner of Grand and Merrimack, back in the 1910s, there used to be an arena standing that was where board track motorcycle racers rode on a 62-degree bank, which was the steepest in the country. And these guys rode around this thing at 80 miles an hour, really like risking their lives.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, Cameron, where'd you find all these photographs? And after you tell us what this one is, I want you to explain what the process was you went through, where you found them and how you chose which ones to use.
Yeah, this is a great shot. This is actually Nellie Grant, Ulysses S. Grant's daughter, and she was helping out at the Mississippi Valley Sanitary Fair in 1864, helping raise money for wounded Union soldiers by dressing up as the old woman in the shoe and helping sell raffle tickets.
Wow. So were these photographs easy to come by?
Sometimes. The Missouri History Museum was a great help. And actually, Jamie works for the Missouri History Museum, so that was a great help. But we really had to go through and do some hunting and searching to find some of the really rare and offbeat photos.
Do you want to say anything about your background and Jamie's background? What drew you two together to do a book like this?
Well, actually, the publisher brought us together, and I think that they probably saw a common interest. We both are big fans of St. Louis history, and we both have a very high interest in the visual aspect, photographs and things like that.
Mm-hmm. When you find old photographs, are they always accessible for you to publish, or is that sometimes tricky?
That is tricky. For example, we have to have permission from the owner of the photograph for a place like the Missouri History Museum, or another example is the Campbell House Museum downtown. Mm-hmm. We have a few of their photographs in the book. But other places, if we could not determine the original author or owner of a photograph, we couldn't use it.
How long did it take you to do this?
It took us about a little less than a year to do it. So it started in about October of last year. And so maybe it was exactly a year. The book came out October 15th.
Without going into too much detail, I'm just kind of curious. You two get together. I'm assuming you hadn't worked together before.
We had not. We knew each other, and she helped me with photographs for Lost Treasures of St. Louis.
Uh-huh.
But we did not really start working together until the project started.
Well, I'm a big fan of Reedy Press because on this show and at STL TV, we like to focus on everything St. Louis, and that's what Reedy Press does too.
I am so proud to be an author for Reedy Press, and I'll even admit I've had other publishers approach me, and I'm happy with Reedy. I'm sticking with them. And I do agree with you. They have, they're so pro St. Louis, and I'm very happy to be part of their family.
Mm-hmm. So when you and Jamie first got together, how do two people that don't know each other that well get together and focus on where they're going? I mean, do you meet every 3 days for 2 years, or what happens?
No, we're actually meeting more now that we're doing presentations together and appearances. But when we worked on the book, we did much of it online, where we simply divided the photographs up, and then we touched base about if we liked what we were doing and trying to make our writing look similar, and we got along great.
Huh. People might remember the Reedy Press warehouse fire. I've lost track of time. Was that a year ago or 2 years?
It was November 14th, 2017.
And a lot of everybody's inventory was lost in the fire. Everybody's
Yes.
back to normal now, but did you go through something there too?
I did. I lost the full inventory of Lost Treasures of St. Louis. I'm so glad Reedy got back on their feet, but I did lose my inventory for that Christmas. It didn't, but the book was put into print right away, and I think it arrived December 24th. So, but But we're back in business and churning out great new books.
I think they moved their warehouse, haven't they?
They did. The old warehouse is now a field, and the new warehouse is actually much better than the last one. So
Scenes of Historic Wonder St. Louis is the name of the book, and I think we have a couple more images
great.
from the book to look at.
Yeah, this is a 29-foot high tunnel that goes under Forest Park. This is where River de Pear is diverted underground to go under the park, which a lot of people don't realize happens, that it's an actual river that is going underground.
How come I haven't seen it?
I don't know.
I mean, could I have access to it?
No.
Right, so that explains it.
Right.
What's this?
This is one of my favorites. This is Julia Horner. She is the first woman to ever ascend in a hot air balloon in St. Louis in 1909. And one of my favorite stories of her is that when she came down to the ground on the Illinois side of the river, 3 farmers attempted to help her. And when they grabbed the basket, they were dragged into a barbed wire fence where they ripped their trousers, and Julia promised to hem them for them. So, in the wake of that, and it's not just photographs in the book. We have fun ads and things like maps and things. This is the World's Fair camera. This was a novelty where that was sold at the World's Fair that would. You would have somebody pose for a photo and a stream of water would shoot them in the face. But what's notable about this camera is it actually also took photos. So it actually worked. So you could take a
I like the first part of it better.
Yeah, but you could take a photo of the person after they were startled by the trick.
And we just have about a minute left, but there's so many stories, great photographs in this book, and I just opened it. The magnificent Southern Hotel burns to the ground. I never even heard of that.
Yeah, the Southern Hotel was the most exquisite, magnificent hotel that burned in 1877. It was at the corner of 4th and Walnut. And it's got a great story behind it because a fireman named Phelim O'Toole actually climbed up bed sheets to the 6th floor of the hotel, hand over hand, entered one of the hotel rooms and tied bed sheets around the guests and lowered them down to the portico below.
Well, Cameron Collins, thank you for being here. You have another book in mind?
There's more coming. We're still working through what's coming.
No comment?
Yeah, we're working on it.
The book is Scenes of Historic Wonder St. Louis from Reedy Press. You can go to reedypress.com or available at all bookstores. You probably have a couple more book signings coming up.
We sure do.
People can go online and find out more about that. Cameron Collins, along with your co-author, Jamie Barassa.
Yes.
Please tell her hi for us, and
I
thank
sure
you
will.
again for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Potter. That's all the time we have for City Corner. Thanks for watching, and join us next time. Bye.